So, the trade deadline. Oh, and there was technically a game the Kraken played. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken lose 3-0 to the Winnipeg Jets after just a couple days ago beating the Jets in Winnipeg. And I do think 3-0 probably makes it sound a little bit worse than it actually was. And between the two games against the Jets, with the Jets being a very good team, one of the best in the NHL, to get 2 points out of those two games, I think is a pretty good result for the Kraken. But at the same time, this game by itself is definitely a missed opportunity where the Kraken can't afford to have that many more of these down the stretch if they want to make it to the playoffs. And right out of the gate, I'm just going to come out and say that this is not going to be a very long video, or at least the part specifically about this game is not going to be very long, as the game itself does not really offer much to talk about. In fact, the highlight pack of this game is already significantly shorter than most highlight packs are, and even with that, the first 2 periods of it only last about 3 minutes. And for what that's worth, I don't know how they got 3 minutes out of the first 2 periods. So with that being the case, maybe the silver lining of that is that there probably will be time towards the end of this video, maybe after the 3 stars or however many stars we managed to get in this game, to go a little bit more over what the Kraken did at the deadline that I haven't already talked about here on the channel. With that though, let's just get into this game where the Kraken go into the game with the exact same lineup they had in the last game against the Jets, and it's hard to blame them for that. They did win that game against a lot of odds against them, the second half of a back-to-back where they got pretty beat up the night before in Calgary, with travel on the road against one of the best teams in the NHL, missing your top defenseman. And so in that way, with this being the same lineup, it does mean that Vince Dunn also misses this game due to the same injury. Hopefully the day-to-day injury that has him out will heal up here in the next 3-day span before they take on the Golden Knights in a game they very much need to win for the wildcard race coming up on Tuesday. Regardless of Dunn's absence though, again, they did win the first game against the Jets a couple days ago without Dunn as well, so they had every chance to do that in this one. And they definitely got those chances in the first period where the Jets played a very sloppy first period, but it was met by an almost as sloppy first period from the Kraken. At the end of the period, the shots are, I think, 8-9 in favor of the Jets, though the Kraken definitely, I would say, had the better of the chances. They had a couple pretty quality chances in tight that Brossoit was able to stop in net, so it's Brossoit instead of Hellebuck, as the Jets do at least roll out a different goaltender, if not a slightly different lineup from the one they lost to the Kraken in the previous game with, and for what that's worth, Brossoit had a great game where Hellebuck kind of didn't in the first meeting between the two teams, so maybe that was the difference here. But aside from really both goaltenders playing pretty well in this game, when it came to whatever collection of 10 guys were whacking the puck around between them, that's where, even though on paper this is one of the best teams in the NHL and a team fighting for a playoff spot playing against each other, you could have been convinced that these were two teams that hard sold at the deadline and were tanking for the first overall pick, as it was, again, a very sloppy period, a lot of it being played in the neutral zone, with the two teams just exchanging turnovers back and forth. So eventually, after 20 minutes of whatever you want to call that, we get to the first intermission with the score still 0-0, as neither team has managed to stumble or bumble the puck into the net. Alright, so it wasn't a great first period, really even from an entertainment standpoint, but as we saw a couple days ago, these are two teams very capable of playing good and at the very least entertaining hockey, so given an intermission to regroup, get back out on the ice, maybe it can be better, and no, the second period is basically just a repeat of the first, with maybe the small exception of both teams do have very good scoring chances that they trade about halfway through. The Kraken get a 2-on-1 that Tatar puts off of the crossbar and out, and then back the other way, the Jets get a cross-crease pass to a guy wide open on the far side that has half an empty net to shoot at, and he puts it off the outside of the side of the net. So neither team is able to score on very good chances, and the second period concludes the same way the first did, with the score still tied at 0. So you know what? Look, sure, I could probably find some way to spend more time on the first 2 periods of this game, but honestly, I feel like I've already spent too much time on it. Really, not much of anything happens. It's just horribly sloppy hockey from both teams, constantly turning over the puck, and whenever they did get set up in the offensive end, finding some way to bumble their way across the blue line and at least force a reset, if not turning the puck over back the other way. And honestly, that kind of continues through the first 5 or 6, maybe even 7 minutes of the third period, as this just was not a very well played game at either end of the ice, and was scoreless then for the first 47, almost 48 minutes. But eventually, right around or just after the 47-minute mark, with this game being the type of game it was, sooner or later one of these sloppy mistakes, one way or the other, was gonna end up in the back of the net, and unfortunately it's a Kraken mistake that breaks the ice, as they rim the puck around the boards up towards the corner, where McCann tries to fight the puck away from, I can't remember who it was, but ends up losing that fight. It gets down to another Jets player who then finds a wide open Mark Scheifele right in front of the net. He's been completely forgotten about. I think it was Will Borgen, who kind of just has this whole play happen around him. Not a very good night for that Borgen-Alexiak pair. And obviously, as you can probably tell from the screenshot, this is not an ideal situation to put your goaltender in one-on-one with a guy who has all sorts of time to make whatever move he wants, but especially when it's one of the two best players on the opposing team, or certainly one of the three best players on that team. And sure enough, Scheifele with that time is able to outweight Decord and eventually force it through the 5-hole to get the Jets on the board first. But of course, with this game being the way that it was, hardly 30 seconds later, almost right after the ensuing faceoff, Burakovsky gets on a breakaway as the Jets allow him to get through everybody towards the Jets net, and eventually it's Mark Scheifele, a forward, so that should tell you everything you need to know that Scheifele, a forward, is the first one back, ends up tripping Burakovsky right in front of the net, so he goes careening into Brossoit, taking Brossoit and the net with him, while Scheifele ends up catching just the end of Burakovsky's skate in the ear, which would cause him to miss pretty much the rest of the third period, right up until the end of it. So a bit of a scary moment there, not only for Scheifele, who has a skate right around his head, and it might have clipped his ear a little bit, I'd have to imagine, since he left the game for a period of time, even though he does return towards the last couple minutes of the third period. He had to have at least gotten somewhat cut by that skate, or something had to have happened there. And then for Burakovsky, who's already struggled with major injuries through the last couple seasons, to have him taken out and slide into a goaltender as heavily padded as they are, not necessarily what you want to see as a Kraken fan either. Fortunately though, Burakovsky does get up no worse for wear, even if he is covered in snow, and Scheifele, like I said, does return to the game. Unlike, and I forgot to mention this after the first, Schwartz did leave after the first intermission and did not come back, so that will be something to watch for the Kraken. But this trip on Burakovsky by Scheifele does lead to the lone power play of the game, and it's a power play for the Kraken that, all things considered, even though they don't score, was a pretty good one. They get a number of shots off on net. I think Tolvanen by himself had 3 shots on net, and they created a couple pretty good looks, just aren't able to solve Brossoit. So unfortunately for the Kraken, that only power play of the game for either team does get killed off, and the Kraken get one more press after it's killed, but that doesn't last very long, and then right back the other way, it's a sloppy back check from the Kraken as they also try to roll a partial change to get off the power play unit and into a normal line setup, but unfortunately, those two things, the sloppy back check and ill-timed change, allowed the Jets to turn what really should have been a nothing transition into a 3-on-2 chance as they cross the Kraken blue line. They get a shot off on net, which rebounds out to one Jets player. He gets the second shot off. Decord saves both of those. But the third chance, as the puck gets kicked around the feet of, I can't remember who it is. It might have actually been Borgen a second time. This time it's really hard to blame him. The puck's just bouncing around at his feet. But before Borgen can find it, it's the third man in for the Jets. Once again, for the second time in 2 games, the son of Kraken assistant coach Lowry, who ends up finding the puck in Borgen's feet and slapping it into the net past Decord to give the Jets the 2-0 lead. And then through the final 8 or maybe 9 minutes of the game after the second goal goes in, the Kraken really aren't able to generate much of anything offensively. The Jets don't do much themselves. They kind of just stagnate this game and burn out the rest of the clock. Eventually, the Kraken do go empty net with just under 2 minutes left, which is really not enough time to have a 2-goal comeback unless a miracle happens. So would have been nice to see them maybe pull Decord a bit earlier. They had a couple chances with faceoffs in the Jets' end at around 5 minutes and then around 3.5 minutes. Either one of those, I think, would have been a good chance to get the 6th guy out there. Instead, though, Hackstall decides to wait until the Kraken get clear possession and headed towards the Jets' end of the ice, which doesn't happen until under 2 minutes left. Eventually, I mean, it probably wouldn't have mattered based on how this game was going and how the Kraken had trouble really sustaining any pressure in the offensive end outside of the time they were on the power play. So eventually, without too much trouble, the Jets do find the empty net to make it 3-0, and that's our final score. So again, in the end, one more time with this game in summary, there's just not that much to say about it, other than it was an incredibly sloppily played game, really by both teams, and the Jets were just able to capitalize on that 2 times while the Kraken were unable to do it once. So in that way, I suppose it is kind of frustrating that the Kraken were not able to take advantage of a sloppy game from one of the best teams in the NHL, but at the same time, it's one of the best teams in the NHL, so they're able to overcome their mistakes and make the Kraken pay for a couple of them. As for what it means for the Kraken in the big picture in the wildcard race, well, one, obviously it's a missed opportunity to pick up any points in the standings, which doesn't help, but not a lot has changed in that way since the Kraken beat the Jets a few days ago. Unfortunately, the Predators did win, so they're now 8 points ahead of the Kraken instead of 6, where the Golden Knights did lose, so they remain 6 points ahead of the Kraken, and the Wild did pick up 1 point with an overtime loss this same night here on Friday. So now there's 4 teams tied at 67 points and all chasing the 2 teams, one at 73 in the Golden Knights and one at 74 in the Predators, which then does very much make the next stretch of 5 games incredibly important for the Kraken, as their next game on Tuesday is against that Golden Knights team. Then 2 games later, they get the Predators, and 2 games after that, they get the Golden Knights again. So if they can win those 2 games against the Golden Knights, then they'll pull right up against them. And if they can win that game against the Predators, obviously that would help as well. And then mixed in there between those 3 games, you've got a Capitals team who will be coming in after having full sold at the deadline, so that's a team you probably should beat. And then a Sabres team who you've never lost to, and also sold off a couple pretty key players at the deadline as well. So those are 2 games you definitely should win, mixed in with 3 games that are basically must-wins against the teams currently sitting in those wildcard spots that for the Kraken, they're trying to work their way into. And if they can at least stay in the hunt over this next stretch of 5 games, then the schedule lightens up quite a bit for the next couple weeks after that, and that's where you could pick up some pretty consistent points and hope for a couple losses here and there by those wildcard teams to then jump into one of those 2 spots. Either way, it's a very important 2 or 3 weeks coming up here for the Kraken, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens, especially in these 3 upcoming games against those wildcard teams. At least for now, though, let's close this game out with the Kraken 3 stars. As always, brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you want to help support this channel a little bit more than you already are and help decide these 3 stars, you can do that by going to the link down below and supporting on Patreon as well. And I don't think I can really get 3 stars in this game. Honestly, I can really only think of one guy that played particularly well pretty much the entire night, and that was Joey Daccord. He really gives the Kraken every chance to win this game. Yeah, 2 do get past him, but both of those are pretty bad mistakes by the team in front of him that allow those chances in the first place, and he'd already bailed them out on a couple of occasions to that point in the game, midway through the 3rd. So yeah, that's the only star I'm going to give out for this one. So then as for the trade deadline talk that I promised at the beginning of the video, well, if you haven't already heard, the Kraken did make one trade. They trade Alex Wennberg away to New York Rangers for a 2024, so this upcoming draft, 2nd round pick, and a 2025 4th round pick. And I did a whole video already about that trade, so you can watch that. It's the last video posted on the channel. As I just said, though, that does turn out to be the only trade the Kraken makes, so Justin Schultz, kind of surprisingly to me, does end up sticking around. It did kind of seem like the market for a defenseman, especially a 2nd pair defenseman, was kind of a 4th round pick. And I guess Ron Francis figured that a 4th round pick wasn't really worth trading away a key part of a team that still does have a chance to make the playoffs this year. The Kraken obviously get a lot more for Alex Wennberg, and a 2nd and 4th I think probably was worth making that trade, even if they don't end up getting the 1st. That was at least rumored to be something the Kraken were asking for. Aside from that, though, no other trades. The only other notable thing that happens at the trade deadline here is the Kraken do end up getting Jordan Eberle signed to a 2-year extension that'll pay him $4.75 million over the next 2 seasons, which I think is a pretty fair deal for Eberle. And even though he is getting older, which is part of why the term is only 2 years instead of the 3 that it sounds like he was asking for, he still is playing pretty well for the Kraken and contributing offensively, certainly. Plus, there's the veteran presence that he adds to a team that is going to be bringing in a lot of youth over the next couple of years, with at least Shane Wright and still Matty Beniers just in his 2nd season. So I do think Eberle offers quite a bit in that way that's valuable to the team. Obviously, he's pretty much the de facto captain at this point. He's always the one talking to officials whenever there's a call that captains tend to go over there and see what's going on. And he's kind of already the default media guy that they trot out there to talk to the media when they don't have any other better options. I mean, he doesn't end up doing that in this game, but often after losses, they'll trot out Eberle in kind of the same way they would a captain. So even though they don't have a captain, he kind of has been filling that role. Either way, it's a long way of saying that I think it's a fair deal, and personally I'm happy to see Eberle sticking around for another couple years. It is a full no trade clause that also gets added onto this, which definitely lines up with Eberle saying that he wanted to stick around in Seattle for the rest of his career, and who knows, maybe these 2 years are that. Otherwise, you are getting into the later part of his 30s, and you're looking at certainly more veteran level contracts and taking a bit of a pay cut in a couple of years' time if he does stay on the team. Other than that, though, I really don't think there's too much else to talk about with the trade deadline for the Kraken. It was a pretty quiet one, as was to be expected with where the team stands in the standings and what they had to trade at the trade deadline versus what the market was. Either way, let me know in the comment section what you think about this game, which I can't imagine was much. It was not a very interesting game, or the trade deadline for the Kraken as well, if you haven't already told me in that video I did about the Wennberg trade. Until next time, though, if you haven't made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy the video, buttons for that kind of stuff down below help support the channel, like and subscribe, of course. And well, I'll have power rankings coming out on Sunday, and then that very important, or the first of two very important games against Vegas on Tuesday. Until then, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.